Hello and welcome to this second class of Canon Law for Priests of the Diocese. We'll be talking about different aspects of matrimonial canon law. In your first class, you may remember that the topic was, what is marriage? In this class today, we're going to explore two facets of when a marriage may not be valid. One is a dissolution scenario, and the other is circumstances of nullity. I am Deacon Jim Tremonti. I'm here with Dr. Felix Menendez, who is a diocesan judge. I am an advocate, Deacon Jim Tremonti. I'm an advocate with the tribunal. And we thought we would have this conversation today about the topic of dissolutions and nullity. So, Dr. Felix, I'll hand the mic to you.
Thank you. And I mean, most important of all, we're friends. Right?
Yes.
There you go. Yes. I mean, you are not only an advocate, you're an esteemed advocate of the tribunal, and you have been a lawyer through your life, right? In New Orleans, in Louisiana, right. Correct? Yeah. Okay, so I mean, we're going to get into, first we saw what marriage is, and now we're going to see the other side. As you're going to see, this course is going to get more and more practical as it goes down. So from the most theoretical, what is marriage, the foundations, the history of marriage, to now how can a marriage be dissolved or declared invalid, and finally, how is exactly that process? How does it work here at the tribunal? What is that we do? Okay, so as you know, we don't believe in divorce, right? Divorce is not a thing in the Catholic Church. We don't have divorces, right? However, and this is something we usually don't speak about, we do dissolve matrimonial bonds, right?
How is that possible?
Yeah, right, right. It was, it came to a bit of a shock to me when I first learned about it. I think something similar happened to Scott Hahn with his conversion. I read, I think it was in Rome Sweet Home, which I read back in the day in Spanish, Roma Dulce Hogar, right? It was, wow, I love that book. And I think he was very impressed of how the Catholic Church is the custodian of the true biblical essences, right? In particular, in the theme of in the fertility issue, right? And I think he describes his conversion first. This was a mystery novel, then it was a horror novel, and finally it ended up being a romantic novel, right? And to him, it was so like the only church that is being truly biblical, because he still has that Protestant thing of being biblical about everything, right? The only one that is keeping the true meaning of the biblical revelation on love, and that is the Catholic Church. And he became a little bit of a radical on that topic. And then later on, he said, "Well, but there are some exceptions." No, he said So the consideration of the cycles of fertility of the woman, or the knowledge or the study of those cycles, and only having sexual intercourse in special circumstances when the woman is not fertile, right? And he says something like, first I was like, this is not okay, but then he saw the wisdom of the Mother Church, right? And, well, I think that's true also with the teachings of the Lord on divorce, right? So it's a scandal. So the same scandal that the apostles had when Jesus first said no divorce, the church still has today, right? I think that's pretty clear, right? We're still hurting in the same foot. I mean, the same problem, like, oh, if we cannot divorce, then we shouldn't even get married, right? It's not worth it, right? The same issue. So it's like that conversation echoes through the centuries, right? And we're still having the same, but what do you mean I cannot divorce, right? The church tries, as a good mother, to go as far as she can to solve those situations in which someone has failed in their marriage without betraying the mandate of the Lord. And being as honest as we can, we think that, the church teaches, but also, I mean, it's fair to say we think, because we're Catholic and we have the mind of the church, right? We think with the Mother Church that the Lord has not given the church the authority to dissolve a sacramental and consummated marriage, right? That is not a dogma, but is veritas definitive tenende. So it's a teaching. There was a document years ago of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, today the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, that explained those levels of certainty and made it very precise and very clear. So we have dogmatic truths, like, I don't know, God is Father, Son, Holy Spirit, right? Jesus Christ is truly present in the Eucharist. Dogmatic, essentially connected with the deposit of the revelation. And then we have some things that are to be held definitively. This is one of them, right? It's not a dogma. We don't consider it dogmatic, right? But it's, I think there was, this old expression could be applied here, pis auribus offendens, no? That it's offensive to pious ears, right? To say that the church could dissolve those marriages, right? So when the spouses who are baptized and have celebrated a valid marriage give each other in the flesh, having sexual intercourse, that is like the seal, definitive tying of the knot that no man can dissolve.
That's the bond that God creates at that moment. Is that where the bond is created?
Well, I mean, the bond is created, the bond in particular is created by the spouses. So God creates the institution.
Right.
Now, I mean, in fine theology, you can say that everything can be ultimately attributed to God, right? So, so the fact that the church cannot dissolve ratified and consummated has a reverse side, which is, well, the church can dissolve the non-sacramental and the non-consummated marriages, right? So in the past lesson, we saw that a sacramental marriage is a valid marriage celebrated between two baptized people. Baptized, not Catholic, baptized. So a Protestant with a Catholic, two Protestants, an Orthodox with those are sacramental marriages. And it's not possible to have a marriage that is valid between baptized, that is not eo ipso, says the law, so for the same reason, a sacrament, okay? So the only conditions for a marriage to be sacramental are valid marriage and valid baptism. That's it. So when the marriage is not sacramental, it can be dissolved in some situations. And when the marriage is non-consummated, it can be dissolved in some situations, right? And that is the first part of what we want to talk. Now, another issue, different from that, is the declaration of nullity, right? Those are two different things. On the one hand, you have marriages that are valid. No one doubts their validity. Their validity at least is not put into question, even if someone may doubt it, right? In some cases, right? And in some cases, it happens, right? That some cases are proposed to the Holy See for the dissolution through the favor of the faith, also known as Petrine privilege. And there are some doubts. Maybe this was not really a valid marriage. And the law mandates us to make a note of that, right? I was the instructor here for dissolution cases for a few years, and now we have Father Schroff, a priest of the diocese, doing that. So if we are doing the instruction and we know maybe there is, well, the Holy See asks us to make note and let the Holy See, who's the only instance who can study the case and judge the case. We are only instructors, right? That, well, there are some doubts, okay? But those are the two different things. On the one hand, you have marriages that are not in their validity is not in question, and then you have marriages that their very existence as such is put into question, right? And we will see that there are only three sources of matrimonial nullity, right? Only three things can make a marriage invalid. I mean, it's a way of saying, because among these three things you have a lot of different grounds, etc. But it's either a lack of canonical form, an impediment, or a defect or vice of the consent, right? Because it's the consent that makes marriage. If something important, essential, is missing from that consent, there is no really a consent, and the marriage is invalid. Okay. So first, with the dissolution, we have three processes, three different ways by which non-sacramental and non-consummated marriages are dissolved. And we have the Pauline privilege, Petrine privilege, and non-consummation. Okay, the Pauline privilege, the non-consummated marriage is called processus superrato et non consumato. So process on the, or super, no, about the non-consummated sacramental, rato is sacramental, and non-consummated. And I mean, typically we call it the superrato, which is like the super mouse, right?
How do you prove that?
Well, we'll get to that. Let me first talk about the non-sacramentals, and then we'll talk about the non-consummated marriage. Okay, so Pauline is the oldest of these dissolutions, right? And it comes, let me read from 1 Corinthians 7. St. Paul says, and that's why it's called Pauline privilege, because it goes all the way back to him. To the rest I say this, I, not the Lord. If any brother has a wife who is not a believer, and she's willing to live with him, he must not divorce her. And if a woman has a husband who's not a believer, and he's willing to live with her, she must not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband has been sanctified through his wife, and the unbelieving wife has been sanctified through her believing husband. But if the unbeliever leaves, let it be so. The brother or the sister is not bound in such circumstances. God has called us to live in peace, right? And this canonical text, because canonical in both senses, so because it's in the canon of the Bible and because it's canon law. I mean, this is an apostle establishing a discipline that binds the church. So as you probably know, bishops have apostolic authority restricted to their jurisdictions, as opposed to the apostles who have that authority universally, right? That's why one of the bishops, the successor of Peter, in the See of Rome, by the way, not in the See of Antiochia, has apostolic authority. That's what we call the See of Rome. We call it the Apostolic See, because it's the seat where there is one bishop that still has apostolic authority, right? Even though today we should be talking more about synodality, as you know, because it's one thing shouldn't oppose the other. Okay, so this is like the ancestor of our current discipline on the Pauline privilege, right? The Pauline privilege is regulated in the Code of Canon Law. It appears there, and I mean, to be fair, it's not so much a process as a set of requirements, right? The other two, the Petrine privilege and the non-consummation privilege, are processes established in the law. You need to follow some steps. You need to do you need to receive the case. You need to do the instruction, and all that is mandated with procedural laws. Pauline privilege is more like a prenuptial investigation. It's not that exactly, but it's more along those lines, right? The Pauline privilege is a set of requirements that if someone who wants to marry meets, then the official of the church can admit that person to the wedding, right? And the requirements are fairly simple and straightforward. You have two unbaptized people who get married, right? That is a natural, valid marriage, right? One of the two becomes a faithful, becomes baptized, receives baptism, the Christian initiation. Then the unbaptized party abandons the baptized party, and by abandonment here we mean either morally or physically, right? Physical abandonment is that they leave. I mean, goodbye. I leave you. I abandon you. The moral abandonment is that they don't allow them to live in peace with the Creator or without affront to the Creator. Sorry, it's without affront. I'm reading my notes. This means, for instance, that they don't allow you to live the faith, they don't allow you to go to Mass, they don't allow you to pray, they hide your Bible, right? This kind of thing. Or they are asking you to do sinful acts, etc. That is considered psychological, moral abandonment, excuse me. When that happens, the non-baptized party, leaves, right, physically or morally. The baptized party is allowed to marry anew. But there is no official of the church that grants the Pauline privilege. The Pauline privilege is granted by the law, right? So the official only makes sure that the requirements are met. By the way, there is also another thing called the interpellations, so that the official of the church needs to go to the unbaptized person and say, do you want to be baptized? Do you want to live in peace with this person before the Pauline privilege can be granted, right? This was typically applied since very early in the history of the church in territories of mission, right? Where it was fairly easy to know who was unbaptized, right? I mean, you are in a place lost in a corner of the world where the Catholic community is our 10 families, right? So it's very easy to know who's not baptized. Nowadays it's different, but we do, not many, but some cases, right? Here we have a very diverse community. We have a lot of people coming from all over the world, and we have a lot of unbaptized couples who are interested for different reasons. We have a lot of converts who have been baptized recently, so we do instruct Pauline privilege. I'm sure you have proposed some as an advocate.
So a point of clarification maybe here is the text from St. Paul, okay, talks about a believer. Now, is that the baptized person the believer? And I guess a question about technically they're both unbaptized when they're married, and then one gets baptized later, or do they both have to be unbaptized during the whole marriage?
So they need to be unbaptized for the Pauline privilege to apply at the time of the wedding.
Okay.
And the order of the baptism is irrelevant.
Okay.
So the baptized person needs to be baptized by the time that the new wedding takes place, right? But it could be that they were baptized before the unbaptized left or after. Those both apply. In this sense, by the way, there is a saying that when the Pauline privilege applies, because the old marriage ends with the celebration of the new marriage, right? There is no concession. It's not like in the other two dissolution cases, the Pope personally grants the dissolution. In this, is just the official of the church making sure, okay, I'm baptized, okay, checking all the boxes. It's the law that grants the privilege. So they say that the bride goes down the aisle married to a man and comes back married to another, right? Or the groom, the same, right? You mentioned the text from St. Paul. I mean, this is, so to say, the grandfather of our current law, right? And our current law is the one that is binding, right? So I'm not sure of what was the Greek word when he says believer. Is probably a faithful, right? Meaning a member of the community. I'm not sure what's the we could look it up.
But nevertheless, the canon law today talks about
so
baptized and
baptized, and this also could apply regardless of whether they have a very alive and strong faith. Okay, we typically in canon law we don't really look for those things very much. We care more about the status of persons. And I know, we're doing this for our priests, our clergy. And while we're not opposed, we certainly are not, we work in common, we work together, there are different perspectives. And that is important. I mean, you were a lawyer your whole life, and we lawyers have a particular view of the world, right? I don't know how you decided to become a lawyer, but for me, it was precisely with this precision. I loved it, right? It's like, it was many years ago, I was studying theology, and I am very privileged. I have wonderful teachers, right? And there was once a question about the validity of a baptism, right? And they asked the theologian, and really, don't get me wrong, I love this guy. He's one of my best teachers. One of these teachers, you know that their classes are, they speak about this and the other, and and it's wow. I mean, you absorb it like a sponge, right? And then I had what was my mentor, Roberto Serres. It's just, in my humble opinion, one of the best canonists alive, right? And they asked them about this issue, right? The theologian started this and that, the importance of baptism, right? And then if that is the thing, then that. The canonist said, 6 requirements for validity. check, valid. Right? And I want to be that guy. I want to be the guy that makes the clear distinction, which I guess for others, we are narrow-minded. Okay, man, accept it, right?
Well, that's the approach of canon law. Civil law is quite different, and the idea is you're looking for the gray areas, right? Yeah, you're looking to find the interpretations and playing with the definitions and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'd analogize canon lawyer more to an accountant than to a civil lawyer. But anyway.
Well, maybe the difference there is so there is a huge difference between canon law and secular law, because canon law is bound by natural law. We believe in natural law, and it's part of our legal system, like positively there, right? And it's natural law is mentioned in our laws, right? So, for instance, we canonize secular laws in some things as long as it doesn't go against natural law. That's in our canons. So probably because we believe in a justice that precedes our legal system, right? And not just some author thinking, no, that is the core of our understanding of law. Secular laws and canon law are pretty different, right? Because for us, the law is not a bunch of guys who got together in Congress and passed laws. I mean, that's crazy in my mind as a
Sure,
lawyer,
as a canon lawyer, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because that is not what justice is. I mean, and in Nazi Germany, it was the law to obey the Führer, right? And they all were, by the way, in the Nuremberg trials, many of them say, well, I was following orders, right? And I was doing what was mandated by the... And we understand naturally that's wrong. That's wrong. I mean, who cares that there is a law saying that you should, I don't know, discriminate black people or white people or whoever, or men or women? That's wrong. I mean, it doesn't matter that the majority of the population agrees on that. Who cares? What really matters is what is justice, right? What is the object of justice in this situation, right? That's jurisprudence, right? Or jurisdiction. Sure. Say the right,
which is greatly missing from our.
In secular laws today, it's all positivism, right? It's like the law is this thing that we agree on.
Whoever
and
has
if
the
you
power
agree
to agree, right.
on killing fetuses, well, it's the law. Right. Well, that law is wrong. And by the way, from the point of view of a Catholic, Aquinas says that an unjust law is not a true law, right? That's just a false resemblance of a law, right? But
you could even say that
we digress a little bit.
You could even say that about church law too, right?
Okay, don't get come on. These secular lawyers, right? So I don't know how we got here, but the point is that what is binding now for us is in regard to the Pauline privilege is the canons right now. So it's whether the person was baptized or not at the time, whether the person abandoned, yes or no, right? I mean, so even it says the faithful. Yeah. Okay. The other two dissolution processes are established procedures that we need to follow, and both are similar in the sense that they both have two phases, right? The first is the phase of the instruction, and the other is the phase of the decision. The instruction is conducted at the local level, at the diocese, and the decision is made and exclusively by the Holy See. So only the Pope and his office, which is the Roman Curia, can have competence to decide in these cases, right? And so in both the Petrine or favor of the faith, and by the way, there is a little bit of an issue with the names, right? Because you can hear favor of the faith, which is the preferred name from the Holy See. They prefer speaking about favor of the faith cases. Petrine privilege is a name proposed by some private authors. You won't find that in official texts. However, I think Petrine case is better. Humbly, it's just me, okay? You can call it whatever you think is best, but I think it's better because Pauline privilege is also a favor of the faith. And it says so directly in the canons. So a marriage is dissolved in favor of the faith through the Pauline privilege, right? And the idea is that both are there to favor the faith, right? To help people live their faith, right? Okay, so Petrine privilege, aka favor of the faith cases, are for non-sacramental marriages, right? And the authority of the Pope, as far as we know, as a church, right? As far as we know, it reaches to all non-sacramental marriages. So the Pope can dissolve any marriage that is not a sacrament, right? And the Pope can dissolve any marriage that is not consummated. However, the Pope chooses, wisely so, to exercise this authority with moderation, right? So, for instance, you cheat on your wife, and then you want the Pope to go bless that thing, and which would be unfair. In those cases, the privilege is not granted, right? To someone, I mean, you are the one that...
you're the cause of the...
Yeah, the failure of the marriage, it's not granted. Okay. So, in both cases, the church gets, the local church, the local bishop, gets a petition, letter to the Pope from someone saying, please, Holy Father, dissolve my marriage, right? That's this. The petition is addressed to the Holy Father, but is submitted to the local diocese. And typically, these cases are instructed in the tribunal, mostly because we are the canonists of the diocese, but it's not necessarily that they are so, right? They technically are administrative law. They are not the judicial way. They are not judicial processes. They are requests from a person who petitions for a grace that is granted in a rescript of the Pope. Okay.
So what's the base requirement for, and what's the difference in the requirement for the Pauline and the Petrine? You used the terminology not a sacramental marriage. So that means anything that does not involve two baptized persons.
Yes, correct. So I thank you for bringing it, because I was going precisely there. Okay. So this, the church is kind of shy, and rightfully so, about speaking about this, because we don't want to contribute to the demise of marriage that we're witnessing, right? At the end of the day, any divorce, any dissolution, let's be honest, is a failure in life, right? I don't want to offend anybody, but and also I get, the people who, no, divorce is great, divorce is awesome. Well, I get the point, but divorce means that the most important project in your life was unsuccessful. That's what it means. And we can try to be nice, but I don't believe in that kind of niceness.
There's pain and suffering, right?
There's always pain and suffering, and even
particularly if there are children involved. It's even
particularly if there are children involved. And in any case, it's like, well, you committed yourself, and I kind of speak about that. I am the first one, the one that's failed in life. I know failure a lot. And I don't think it helps anybody to try to cover it with a blanket of, no. Let's be honest. I put all the eggs in a basket and it crashed. And I feel for someone who says that my marriage was not the most important project of my life, because, with that I cannot agree. If something is more important to you in life than your marriage, then reassess your life. That's all I can say, because it's wrong. Nothing is more important than family. I've been close to a lot of people dying, right? You probably too. And I've never seen anybody regret not working enough, not making enough money. Right. They all say the same. I'm sorry I wasn't enough with my family, right? Yeah. So, wow, I got all transcendental here. Okay, so I was saying that the church is kind of shy, because it's not like, hey, these solutions, right? But I mean, it's at the same time, the norms for these things are available in the Vatican's website. So you go, you look for the norms for the favor of the faith, and they are there, and they are very interesting, right? How the Pope or the Roman Curia, which is the office of the Pope, like the same that the bishop has a chancery with officials like ourselves working here for our beloved Bishop Hartmeyer. We have the Pope, which is the apostolic authority with a big office called the Roman Curia. You know, John 23rd was very funny, right? He would crack jokes. They say that he once, when he was the nuncio in Paris, walked up to Stalin and he said, "You and I have something in common." "What? You and I? Something in common?" "Yes, the belly." And once they say, I don't know if this is true, but it's great. Si non è vero, è ben trovato. That once they asked, "Holy Father, how many people work at the Vatican?" And I said, "About half of them." So yeah, in that big office in Rome, in the Eternal City, right? They deal with these cases. Okay, so for a Petrine case, I have here written down a summary that I created for our tribunal's functioning. You probably got a copy of this as an advocate, right? Of what are the requirements? Okay, so the marriage was non-sacramental at the time of the wedding, or if it became sacramental afterward, it was not consummated. Okay. So that's the first thing. So it needs to be either two people not baptized who get married, or one baptized and one not baptized that get married. And then it remains not sacramental. That means at least one of the two spouses is not baptized.
And assuming there's no dispensation, right?
What do you mean?
Dispensation to marry a non-Catholic.
Well, if it is a non-baptized, yes, we'll see that later with impediments. Okay, right. Yeah. So the marriage of a Catholic with a non-baptized is null without dispensation. The marriage of a Catholic with a baptized is illicit, but is valid without a dispensation. Right? Yeah. So I am assuming that is a valid marriage. Okay. Right? So a valid marriage of a baptized Catholic or else, right? It can be a Protestant, an Orthodox, whoever, someone who's got a valid baptism with a non-baptized or two non-baptized. Okay, and the marriage remains unsacramental, non-sacramental, until the concession of the grace, or if it became sacramental, they didn't consummate the marriage. And we've seen some cases of that, of people who, being unbaptized, or at least one of them unbaptized, they get married, their marriage remains non-sacramental, then they divorce, they separate, and years later, the spouse who was unbaptized, or both got baptized, each one on their own reality and situation. The Petrine privilege applies too, right? So, which, by the way, here there is an overlap with a non-consummated marriage, and the overlap of competence is there. So both can be considered, both authorities, because the Petrine cases are considered in the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, and the non-consummated is the Roman Rota. So one is a dicastery, the other is a tribunal, but their competences overlap. So this case of the marriage that became sacramental after they separated and was never consummated, I mean, it doesn't need to be after they separated. The requirement is that it was not consummated, right? It can be considered by both authorities and through both processes, right?
But the more common experience, I would think, would be where you have two people who are unbaptized and get married and consummate. And then the question is, when does the baptism occur, and how does that affect the qualification for the Petrine?
Say that again, please.
So, okay, we have two unbaptized people get married.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And after they've been married 5 years, one of them, gets baptized. Yeah. And they're still technically married.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
In the eyes of the church. Absolutely.
In the eyes of the church, right? Does that subsequent baptism impair the ability to qualify for a Petrine privilege?
No.
No, it doesn't. So it's all at the time of the marriage is when the examination takes place.
So the thing is, a marriage that is sacramental and consummated cannot be dissolved, right? So as long as it is non-sacramental, it can be dissolved through the Petrine privilege. As long as it is non-consummated, it can be dissolved through the super rato, or the non-consummation dissolution of the non-consummation process. But there is a special provision here with the Petrine, and maybe we're boring the the priest. I don't know. I mean,
I think this is very practical because
right?
because again, I mean, people come in to see me,
Yeah.
okay, and I'm trying to figure out which box do these people fit in,
Yes,
okay?
yes.
Is this a Pauline? Is this a Petrine?
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
and so I need a real
Yes,
simple
yes.
layman's kind of a reference tool
Yeah.
to use to say, okay, this is legitimately a Pauline. So if
Yeah.
I've got a case where two people were unbaptized when they were married, okay,
Uh-huh.
but one or both were baptized later, then what happens?
Okay,
how
so-
does
so
that subsequent
you have
baptism have any effect on either the Pauline
One
or the Petrine?
baptized, let's say, an Orthodox person, validly marries, let's say, okay, let's forget about all the things, a non-baptized person,
Okay.
right? They remain together. In that marriage is not sacramental, okay? That is not a sacramental. It's a valid marriage, right? Natural, valid marriage, non-sacramental. They remain together, and then they have a fallout, they separate, right? Then the non-baptized person gets baptized. They never meet again. They don't have even the chance to consummate. So if they consummate, that cannot be
It's
dissolved.
over. Okay.
But maybe can. But if they don't consummate, that marriage can be dissolved both through the Petrine privilege and through the non-consummated
Okay.
process.
Got it.
Now, but there are other requirements. Okay. Typically, it is possible to prove the non-baptism of at least one party, right? This is an issue many times because in these administrative and judicial cases, it doesn't matter what you know. What really matters is what you can prove. And sometimes you know things deep down in your heart, but you don't have a way to prove them, right? There is no possibility of resuming the partnership of conjugal life, right? It must be done, right? The petitioner, that's a requirement, was not exclusively or predominantly the culpable cause of the breakdown, right? As we were saying before, we are not here rewarding bad behavior, right? Then the intended spouse was not at fault, right? And by the way, we need to ask that question. I always say, please don't feel offended, but I really need to ask you, were you the reason why they... And I mean, it's interesting. Most of the times they say we didn't even know each other at the time of them. And by the way, this is a point, right? I'm gonna throw this here, just food for thought. I see these people who, so they are married, and then he or she is cheating, and then they leave the current partner to move in with the one they have an affair with. To me, that's crazy. I mean, because you've seen them cheating on their spouse, or like, how can you even trust this person ever, right? Like, I saw you lying to her face, right? I mean, you can do the same thing to me. I could never trust you, right? Okay, sorry for that, but it came to my mind. The marriage was not celebrated thanks to a previous dissolution in favor of the faith. So favor of the faith is only given once in life, right? The petitioner wishes to marry in the Catholic Church. The intended spouse is free to marry in the Catholic Church. The non-Catholic petitioner, okay, that's also interesting. The Petrine privilege is granted also to marry non-Catholics, right? You know, someone would say, but isn't this in favor of the faith? Right? Well, sometimes the best thing is to allow that new marriage for the faith of the person, right? And by the way, this happens here very frequently, right? But the church draws a line. We're not like Muslims that if you don't convert, we are not allowing you to marry. We don't ask for the conversion, but the church knows that sharing the same faith is so important in married life. We both have experienced that in our own marriages, right? How sharing our Catholic faith is so good to us as husbands, right? And to our wives as well.
Well, and that unity that we're called to in marriage, and That's sort of one break in that unity, that if you're not of the same faith, then again, it creates a strain on the unity that you're called to.
Yeah. And also for the transmission of the faith to your children.
Right.
Because if mommy's religion is not good enough for daddy, and if daddy's religion is not good enough for mommy, it probably means
we're confused.
Right. Yeah. None of the two faiths is good enough, right? I mean, doesn't need to be the case, but it's usually the case. So when the church grants this privilege to this, so the let's say a Catholic petitioner who wants to marry a Methodist intended spouse, where we draw the line is the Catholic spouse, the non-Catholic spouse willing to allow the Catholic party freedom to profess religion and to baptize and educate the children as Catholics. So we don't ask them to sign a contract that they will convert to the Catholic faith or that they will have their children, but that they will allow the Catholic party to do so, right? And also there's a look for public scandal. So if this is going to be somewhat of a scandal, the privilege is not granted. However, this is a problem today because people don't really get what scandal means, right? Yeah. Many times, and I'm sure our fellow priests have this issue too, right? Like, what is considered scandalous, right, is, I don't know, that a sinner is not allowed to communicate, right? Instead of the opposite. So scandal is stumble, right? So you're walking and you stumble on something. That is scandalos in Greek, no? Or scandalon, I think it is.
Well, you cause others to trip.
Exactly, right, yeah. Exactly. So that's the whole issue with not giving communion to politicians who openly support the murder of babies, or I don't know, you're the pastor and there is a local mafia and you have a mafia enforcer there. Everyone knows he's a criminal bully who beats up people for a living. I mean, if you give communion to that person, what you're doing, because that's not a private issue that only God knows. No, I mean, everyone knows what you're doing. So if you do that, you are saying it's okay to do it. Because, as you know, to receive the body of Christ, you need to be free from mortal sin. Right. And there are things that are not acceptable in the Catholic Church, right? We believe in the moral absolutes, which I guess it's like in this time of relativism that we live is unacceptable to many, but not to us Catholics. I mean, there are things that you can never do. So you can never murder. You can never fornicate. You can never. There are things that. No, but I fornicated, right, to feed the children. No, sorry, no. There's no way you can do this. Right, which is the typical in the movies. No, the hero is faced with this kind of either you kill these.
Right. So the great scandal would come in the context of this would be someone who was a notorious, cheater on his wife, and who was the one who applied for the favor of the faith.
For instance,
that would be a scandal.
Everyone knows that what you are doing.
Right.
Yeah, but when we ask this question, everyone says, "A scandal? Why? No." No, and many times it's true.
And it depends who you ask too, right?
I guess, right. Many times it's true. Many times it's these situations have been solved years ago. Many times the scandal is that they are not married, right, and that they cannot receive communion, etc. But I think it's important to make this point because we've lost, right? For instance, I see that here in America, a big difference with the church in Spain is that here the church is supported by the contributions of the faithful exclusively because of the separation between church and state, while in Spain the church is supported partially through the taxation, right? So when you do your taxes, you can give some. It's not like in Germany that they have the Kirchensteuer and it's like all the financing of the church comes to the state. Sure. But everything has pros and cons. So here a pastor is terrified of saying no to a big donor, right? Sometimes it takes bravery to be strong enough to say, I am sorry, but no, I'm canceling my subscription. Yeah, I'm sorry. Right? Because shepherding is not telling everyone what they want to hear. That's not a true pastoral approach. A true pastoral approach is shepherding people to heaven. And the shepherd has a staff because sometimes they need to use violence to defend the sheep against the wolf, or to tell the sheep, no, you fall back, right?
Right.
And in Spain, maybe that's not a problem, but we have the problem that we are more subject to the government. So everything is a trade-off in these situations. Okay. So the other process is the non-consummation. It's very rare. I mean, we do have cases, but they are not very common, right? Typically, the few cases we've seen here, if I'm not mistaken,
Probably
right,
immigration-related cases. Somebody trying to get status to be married, and
well, those should be considered as total simulation cases for a declaration of nullity. But maybe, I mean, one could right consider that. I don't know if that's very kosher, but it could, right? I mean, nowadays unconsummated marriages are not very common, but I mean, there are cases.
the problem is just the opposite, right? They're consummated before they're married.
Which is not a consummation. Right? Yeah. So, and by the way, the consummation that has legal effect is the consummation of the sacramental marriage, right? The consummation of the natural marriage. So the first time the spouses who are not in a sacramental marriage, the first time they have sexual intercourse, that, I mean, it's literally the consummation of the natural marriage, but it doesn't have that legal effect of making that bond absolutely indestructible, right? Only dissolvable by death, right? But we've seen cases where the husband leaves after the reception, never to come back, right? Or, I mean, typically it's the case I was saying before, right? That case that can be considered both as a Petrine or as a Pauline, and people who say, well, this marriage is now sacramental because I'm baptized now, but it was never consummated, right? Okay. By the way, about this, and I don't want to get very much to the bottom of it. This is for priests. I don't want to be talking about difficult things. So the non-consummation can be proven, right? You were asking,
that was the
right?
question, right? Yeah.
In two ways. I mean, there are two types of non-consummation. One is the per coarctata tempora, so for the impossibility of the times, meaning they never had the chance to consummate, right? Those are easier to prove, okay? Because you just need to prove that they never were together. So you take declarations, you depose a few witnesses, and they say, no, yeah, they really. So you reach certainty that this marriage was not consummated because they were never alone. They were never under the same roof. They were. I mean, it was, I don't know. Let's say it's a marriage by proxy, right? And they never actually are together. Well, that's a non-consummated marriage, easy to prove. Most difficult it's when you need a physical proof, etc. And again, without forgive me, fellas, right? But as we were saying in a previous class, marriage is about sex, right? And to do this job, you need to be chaste, but you cannot be a prude, right? And I think this is very important. Right. Chastity is the virtue of loving with your body, right? Chastity is the moderation of the concupiscent affect. Sorry, my English fails when it comes to theology. I study theology in Spanish. El afecto concupiscible. Right. So you have the irascible affect or affection and the concupiscence. So you have either your getting mad or your chocolate, right? Right? Those two need to be moderated by the reason, right? Which is the dynamic of virtue, right? The virtue of moderating your bad temper, that's fortitude, right? So many saints had issues with this, right? Saint John Maria Vianney, Saint Teresa of Calcutta. Whoa, she had a temper, right? And God takes that strength and boom, if that strength moderated through virtue, that's the stuff that saints are made of. The other appetite, the concupiscence, is moderated by the virtue of temperance or chastity. So I gotta be chaste in everything I do. I gotta be chaste with you because This is chastity. It is. It is. Hey, how you doing, man? I mean, someone who never touches anyone is not a chaste person, right? I think it's Martin Ronheimer who says someone who never gets mad cannot be virtuous, right? Jesus got mad when he purified the temple. And some people here want to be more sane than Jesus, right? Some will be, I don't know. I don't know. You got too mad, Lord, right? So chastity needs to be, for a Christian, the true meaning of chastity needs to be in everything. So chastity is, you gotta be chaste with your wife too, with your husband, with your father, with your mother, with a beggar in the streets, with a politician. Chastity means that, like all virtues, you act in the precise way that is best for that situation, right? That's why these actions cannot be said beforehand. It's only for the moral absolutes. That, yes, I can tell you, you can never fornicate, but what is the right approach in this particular situation with this particular person? That cannot be foretold, right? That is the virtue of prudence, which prudence is not the virtue of being a politician and calculating and that's not prudence. Prudence is the recta ratio agibilium, the right reason of the things that need to be made. So
doing the right thing in the right time in the right way.
Exactly. That. Thank you. Beautiful. That's beautiful. So for this job, because we're dealing with sex all the time, chastity asks us to speak about sex. Of course, we need to speak about sex with precision, using formal words, no allowing sinful thoughts to, etc. But we need to speak about it. You cannot be a prude and have this job, right? And by the way, some people don't feel called to this precisely because it's too much sex for me. It's too much sex. Yeah, I know a case. Someone that I know I'm very fond of, and it's this person is, I mean, a great canon lawyer. But, I mean, it's tribunal work is a lot of, right? So, going now to the
proof,
to the thing,
the proof of non-consummation.
Exactly.
When there's been an opportunity to be
sometimes
together.
There needs to be report from a doctor, right? So a gynecologist or a urologist, depending on the situation, right? Sometimes the best way to prove is virginity, right? Etc. But I mean, in my life, I've worked in 3 different tribunals in 2 different countries. So whatever I say, no one knows where I learned, right? But I've seen some cases that I honestly, I prefer not to have to to deal with them because of the detail.
Yes.
Okay, I guess.
Leave that to the experts.
So these cases are instructed. By instruction, we mean gather all the evidence at the local level, right? So typically it's declarations, right? Most proofs are documents and declarations. Then there are pericias in Latin or expert reports for some things. And when all the information is gathered, it is sent to the Holy See, and in the Holy See, you have the the Petrine favor of the faith cases considered in the dicastery for the doctrine of the faith, the non-consummation cases considered at the Roman Rota, and what they do there is they study the case and they put it in the form of a question, whether this case should be presented to the Holy Father for dissolution, right? So the officials of the congregation study it. And if the answer to the question is yes, they propose it to the Holy Father. And that's beautiful, by the way. Those who get these dissolutions, you can tell the Pope heard your name, right? So it's verbally granted by the Pope in the audience of the head of the respective dicastery, and say, well, Holy Father, we have these cases, and the Pope grants that. And then a rescript is written, beautiful, nice document from the Holy See, in Latin, yeah. We translate it here, and we communicate it by order of the Holy See to the beneficiary, who is then free to marry, right? Okay, so these 3 we've seen so far are dissolution cases. So these cases are marriages that exist, that we don't doubt that they are valid marriages, they are just dissolved. We don't call it divorce because divorce has that connotation of the civil divorce, right? And the church has always been opposed to it. So if it is a canonical marriage, if it is a sacrament, who are you, modern state, to mess with it, right? This ferocious, what's the name of the beast, the famous political thinker, that famous book, it's not the Armageddon. So speaking, it's a monster. Speaking of the state, what's the name? Doesn't come.
I'm
to
not
mind
with
now.
you right now. I'm sorry.
Yeah. The Leviathan.
Leviathan. Leviathan. Yes, right.
The Leviathan is
Yeah.
who I don't remember the author. Who's Hobbes? The Leviathan. Leviathan is Hobbes. I don't know. I'm an ignorant. So the Leviathan is that monster that is the modern state that wants to get into everything we are, right? Like in the Middle Ages, we consider ourselves so superior. Oh, in the Middle Ages as well. I tell you, a king in the Middle Ages wouldn't dare to charge 50% taxes to any citizen. They would hang that king. But now you're paying taxes to the state, right? No, you're doing this for America, or you're doing this for Spain. No, you're not. You're doing it for the politicians. Sorry. This is not my turf. Erase that. We'll edit that later.
Good idea.
Okay, so this is the Rubicon, right? The line between dissolution of a valid marriage, declaration of nullity of an invalid marriage. So for us Catholics, there's no divorce. Sacramental and consummated marriages, which are the majority of marriages celebrated among Catholics, cannot be dissolved. So if my marriage fails, what option do I have left, right? And here is where Scott Hahn would say that the wisdom of the Mother Church, trying to go as far as we can. So because marriage is a contract between a man and a woman who establish a permanent partnership open to procreation through sexual intercourse to raise their family together, to have children and raise their families, right? Because it is a contract, it follows the vicissitudes of a contract. And contracts, as you know, as a lawyer, can be null, can be void and invalid. I don't know. I purchased a Lamborghini Countach. I don't know if that's a good car. I don't like cars. What's a great car? I don't know. A Mercedes, right?
Sure.
And someone put a roofie in I was jumping all over the tables in the car shop at the car dealer, right? Well, I can go to a judge and say, please declare the nullity of this purchase because I was not sound of mind, right? Also, I like that in America, you have annulments, right? I don't think we do in Spain. I don't know if we do, but I don't know anything about secular laws. But I like that there is annulment
for a
small set of reasons, right? You marry in Vegas when you were drunk or high, and that can be declared invalid, right? That's interesting. Okay, so for us Catholics, the only avenue left is that declaration of nullity, so that the marriage is declared invalid because something that was essential to the formation of the matrimonial bond is missing, right? So we spoke in the past lesson between the difference between the matrimonium in fieri and matrimonium in facto esse, so the wedding and the union, right? So what we look at, and this is the work that we do here at the Metropolitan Tribunal, as all ecclesiastical tribunals do, is to look at the wedding. So we look there and we try to see if something is missing, something that is mandated. And as I was saying before, there are only three sources of matrimonial nullity. The first one is lack of form. The second one is the impediments, and the third one is a defect or a vice of consent. I like the vices of consent because the consent is vitiated, right? Beautiful. I love these old expressions. They are so flavorful. I love them, right? So the canonical form, I touched on that briefly in the previous lesson. The canonical form is not the place, is the people. That's a important thing for priests who are the ones we're making this for. So when you celebrate a wedding in your parish, okay, the fact that you are in the physical building of the church does not make a marriage follow the canonical form or not. Okay, that is secondary. So a wedding is a sacrament, and even not sacramental marriages are sacred realities, so they should be celebrated in a sacred place, right? A wedding is a most transcendental moment in the life of people, so it should be accorded the dignity it deserves, right? So you are celebrating, for us Catholics, a sacrament of the union of Christ and his church. You're celebrating after the Eucharist, probably the most, or Eucharist and baptism, probably the most symbolic representation of the sacrifice of Christ in the cross, right? The mystery of marriage, as St. Paul unites that. No, he links
Ephesians, right? Yeah.
He links the marriage, the husband and the wife, with the mystery of Christ and his bride, the church. Right? So the sacred place is not the canonical form. Okay, so those are two different things, and it's important because many priests who studied canon law years ago are probably a little blurry on these two concepts. So you have, on the one hand, the sacrament that has to be celebrated in a sacred place, and then you have, on the other hand, the canonical form. Canonical form is a requirement instituted first by the Council of Trent, by which Catholics, to marry validly, have to do it in front of their pastor. So in the jurisdiction, not their pastor, sorry, in front of the pastor of the jurisdiction in which the wedding is taking place, or the bishop of the diocese of the jurisdiction in which the wedding is taking place, or their delegates, right? I said bishop to make things clear, but it's the ordinary. But I mean, that's right. Also, I mean, a bishop can delegate that, we call that the faculty, right? Can delegate in all the priests and deacons of the diocese. He could do that, but that is not by default. So by default, that needs to be delegated for the case, right? Ordinary officiants of weddings are only you guys, the deacons, and the priests, who are the presbyters and the bishops, right? We tend to identify priest with presbyter, and that's a little bit incorrect. We do that too in Spanish, which is sacerdote for the presbyters, for los presbíteros, but sacerdote. So if anyone is a priest, it's more the bishop who has the plenitude of priesthood, right? Okay, so canonical form means 5 people. So the spouses, the priest, and 2 witnesses. The 2 witnesses need to be 2 people who are able to testify. They don't need to be Catholic. I mean, technically, you could two random dudes walking on the street. Hey, can you testify? We're in a hurry. That would be. I mean, I don't recommend it. No. But
you might have to find it one day.
It's okay. And by the way, this trumps all the bride's party, groom's party, all those things that I mean, in Spain we have our own things. Who's the godfather? And I don't know. In Spain, in the weddings, everyone wants to sign. Can I sign to it? Yeah, there you go. Here you go. Sign 20 people. Yeah, make them happy, right? Or here, but all those things, it's important to keep in mind that they are completely secondary. And, even the party, the dress. So what makes a wedding, what makes a sacrament, right, for if they are baptized, is the will. Right? It's like, so the true sacrifice of Christ in the cross is the sacrifice of the will. Right? I mean, his pain, his bleeding, his suffering, of course, like the being pierced through the nerve that cripples you, and the sweating of blood in Gethsemane, of course. But the true sacrifice, what redeemed the world, was the perfect oblation of his will to the Father, right? Similarly to that, what makes the wedding is the will of a man and the will of a woman who agree to crucify themselves to each other, right? As they say, oh, I got married. Yeah, against who?
Well, like we say sometimes that, we're here today to witness a wedding and 2 funerals.
Well, it can be a joke, but it can also be very deep, right? Because you're dying
to yourself,
to yourself, and you're giving each other as property, if we allow that thing to be enslaved to each other, and because it's dying to yourself that you truly live, right? Yeah, that's beautiful, and it's so true. I was, when I was in Spain, I was very close to the neocatechumenals. And they are very serious about these things. And they say in the weddings, you are going to be each other's enemies. you are gonna hate each other, right? And that's, I think that's so beautiful that you are honest about it, and because it's marriage is based on respect. No, it's not. Marriage is based on forgiveness, because sooner or later I'm gonna lose respect. I'm gonna put the slippers on, and I'm gonna be, I don't want to say bad words, but it starts with A and ends with O. Right? I am, because I am human, and I am a sinner. So sooner or later, I'm gonna hurt you, and you're gonna hurt me. And if we don't learn to forgive each other, this is going to fail, right? So this exchange of consents expressed by words of present, right? And that is I think it's medieval, this expression. I'm not sure. The words of present thing is because the words of future are not a wedding. So if I say I promise to marry you, that's not a wedding, right? So the words is I now marry you, right? So that will expressed, by the way, mute people can marry too, right? But it needs to be expressed, right? By either gestures or typically it's by words. Right, that will is what the exchange of consents is what is formally a wedding. The priest is there as a qualified witness, right? What we call the officiant. The priests know this very well.
Because the couples are actually the ministers.
Well,
right?
exactly. They are both the minister and the subjects, right? The priest is not marrying them, even though we say that, no, I'm the priest who married me. But the ones that are marrying each other are the spouses, right? The priest is an official witness, a qualified witness, in the sense that he has the mandate of the church to receive those consents in the name of the mother church, right? And then to bless that in a usually beautiful blessing, right? And then two more witnesses. That is the canonical form. That was instituted by the Council of Trent, and but first it needed to be promulgated diocese by diocese. So until the Code of 1917, when the new code finally made this universal for the whole church, you still had parts of the world where people could marry, Catholics, could marry validly outside of the canonical form. Here in the States, that was the case, right? So in majority Catholic population countries, this was already implanted soon after in Spain, France, Bavaria, right? But in Protestant places, it took much longer. Some places it never was promulgated locally. It was promulgated with a new code. Right. But since at least 1917, Latin Rite Catholics can only marry validly through the canonical form. That's why getting the delegation when you are a priest or a deacon is so important, because if you don't, you are risking them not getting married. And also, well, I got lost there. But, get the delegation, friends. Get the delegation.
And again, you're getting the delegation if you are the officiant outside of your own parish, right? If I go to a Transfiguration Parish or St. Joseph's Parish or St. Clair Parish, okay?
Well, in this diocese,
a delegation from the
in this diocese, you don't need it because the bishop has already given general delegation to all the priests, right? But if the bishop had not done it, you absolutely need it. Yeah, you cannot celebrate validly a wedding outside of the boundaries of your jurisdiction, even if you're a pastor. Right? I think cardinals have special. Serious. I'm not sure about that. Don't take me. I have the rules for delegation somewhere, but this is an introduction. If you have a case where you doubt, call the tribunal. Call the tribunal.
Private graduate class.
and always try to get things in order before a wedding. Take it seriously. This anti-legal prejudice that is so Protestant, so anti-Catholic. We Catholics have been always about laws, right? Since the beginning, we wanted to be a public persona, a public juridical person, since the very beginning, since the emperor time, since put a grain of incense or we'll behead you. Since then, we are a church of laws, and
don't eat the fruit of the tree.
What is that?
It goes all the way back.
Oh, okay. That the Catholic Church has never been the anti-legal kind of church that we see
Anti-establishment, right,
in
yeah.
the Protestants, right? That is because the Protestants typically have that prejudice, right? So the essence of the gospel is charity, the essence of the law is coercion. They stand in opposition, right? That's the School of Munich of canon lawyers, Klaus Mersdorf, Eymans, Rouco Varela, former Archbishop of Madrid. Those were the ones that try to put the foundation of an answer to that Protestant thinking, saying, no. The coercion is in the very core of the gospel. Jesus doesn't say, I know we say it a lot today, hey, Jesus is inviting everyone, and he doesn't compel anybody. Well, I mean, he says,
right?
if you don't convert, you will all perish. Right. That's in the gospel. So a little...
It's a little stronger than an invitation.
Tiny
right?
compelling is there, right? Yeah, so that we're bound.
Right.
Jesus is the new Moses. Moses distinguishes himself for giving the law, right? Yeah. So in that sense, we're very Jewish, and I love it. I think until you know Jewish tradition, you don't really know Catholic tradition, right? There are a lot of things that only make sense when you, right? So we were talking about the Seder Pesach in the past class, right? Once you are able to see a Seder, you say, oh, so this is, so Jesus, right? It's like, the aha moment.
Yeah.
Okay, so lack of form is not okay. Let me build back here. We have two things in America: lack of form and defect of form. Okay, this for us foreigners is like, what is this thing? Okay, so we distinguish here a defective form, which is like, oh, the priest didn't have the delegation, or there was only one witness, or the spouses didn't really issue the consent. And then they have the lack of form thing, which is a discovery for us when we come to the country, right? Which is the merely civil marriage of Catholics, right? And typically in the United States, and again, this is an exception in the Catholic world, there is a mini process called lack of form process. So if you were married, you Catholic were married outside of the Catholic Church, in a city hall or in a Protestant church, and now you want to marry someone else in the Catholic Church, before we allow you to do, you gotta go to the chancery and get a lack of form. Right. It's to you, you're an American guy, to use, yeah, we've been doing that for a long time.
Sure, right.
This is not the case elsewhere. Actually, I mean, I know so many foreign canon lawyers who come here and say, what was this thing, right? We're surprised when we learn about it. To be precise, the church has established, it's in Dignitas Connubii, that in order to establish the freedom to marry of Catholics who attempted a merely civil marriage, there's no need for a judicial process, right? So in other countries, this is done just by the certificate of baptism, civil wedding certificate, civil divorce certificate, boom, that's it, right? This is the case of Queen Letizia in Spain. So she is baptized like all Catholics, like all Spaniards, because as you know, in Spain, even the atheists are Catholic. You know, that anecdote is told in many different versions about the Protestant minister who's trying to evangelize someone in Andalusia, right? In Andalusia. And you just been to Spain, right? So I've heard many versions. The one I like most is the Jehovah's Witness who's knocking door to door, and he goes to this trade union communist leader and look, watchtower, and say, look, I don't believe in the Catholic Church, which is the true one. I'm not going to believe in your thing, right? And it's the Spanish spirit. So in Spain, it's fairly easy to assess these cases. And Queen Letizia was civilly married to a gentleman, and then she got a divorce. She met the current prince, and she got married. And I didn't see it, but I'm sure her prenuptial file was these 3 documents. That's it. I mean, it's proof you were not married. The merely civil marriage of Catholics does not have even the appearance of
Okay,
marriage.
so it has no effect
It has
whatsoever.
no effect whatsoever. You're not married to any effects. I mean, we're not stupid.
Yeah.
We understand that you are married in the eyes of the state of Georgia or whatever, but we are a different system of law, and I don't know, you say a gay couple, right? I am married in the state of California, therefore I go to Russia, and I would in Russia. In Russia, you're gonna no, my friend, you're not getting any privilege here. As a married couple, probably they're gonna throw you in jail, right? But it's
shoot you.
right? Or if you go to Iran, right? So because they have different systems of law, and I'm not speaking about what is just or fair. I'm just stating a difference, right? Here, however, you have so many people from all over the world, different religions, mixes, marriages of different forms and fashion. Be careful because that's gonna catch with a. Thank you, brother. So, and also people here tend to marry serially, right? They get married and divorced and remarry so many times. So it's difficult for the average priest who's dealing with his parish and thing to have all this theoretical knowledge in mind. So understandably so, the acknowledgement that this was a lack of form case is reserved to the diocesan chancery, and that's why we have this thing in this country.
And kind of a point of helpful information from experience, okay? And that is when someone comes to you to talk about or ask about, inquire about a declaration of nullity, okay? Make sure you ask them about prior marriages, because these serial people who get married serially, and you can be surprised sometimes there may be 3 or 4 marriages in the past in addition to the one they're seeking to annul.
Yes, that's something. When I first came, also was a little bit of a culture shock, right? I was not. Now, I mean, shame on me. But by the way, I have a quotation here. Since we are being a little bit, this is from Pope Lambertini, Pope Benedict XIV, who was the one that instituted the office of the Defender of the Bond. Okay. Right? He was a canonist, and he was a wise man. I mean,
how long ago was that?
They say that Benedict XVI took the name not because of, but because of this Pope, because he was also the intellectual guy. Okay. He would have epistolar exchange with Voltaire. I mean, amazing guy. I quote him in my doctoral dissertation. He makes one what is called the Benedictine presumption, which is still operative today. He's a very wise canonist. And I mean, please take this with. I'm quoting a text from 1741. Okay? So the language is not what we're used to, but I think it's great to hear these things every now and then. He says, and this is from De Miseratione, which is the bull by which he creates the office of the defender. It was necessary that these judges, so degenerate, be admonished, so that they would not break with such hasty audacity the sacred bond of marriage. News of this depravity, which must be abolished, has reached us from various quarters, and even examples have been cited of some men who, due to the excessive haste of the judges in declaring marriages null, after taking a first, second, and third wife, while these first wives were still alive, had gone on to contract 4th marriages. Similarly, there have been cases of women who, after having a first, second, and third husband, while these first husbands were still alive, even joined a 4th, not without scandal to the weak and abhorrence from all the righteous, who grieved that the sacred bonds of marriage were thus despised and recklessly broken. I mean, not your typical last 6 or 7 popes language, right? We certainly have softened our language in the church. This is not the way we're used to hear, but this is also Catholic tradition.
So these serial
this is
marriages
also
are
pontifical magisterium.
And these serial marriages are nothing new.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know much about the history, as I know I'm an ignorant, but one of the defenders of the bond told me that the problem at this time was in Poland. I don't know. I don't know. Okay, so we have seen the dissolutions, the first source of matrimonial nullity, and I would like to finish with the second source of matrimonial nullity, which is certainly not very common, but it's very interesting, right? So the church believes that Christ has given to her the discipline of marriage to the point that the church can establish requirements for validity. And this is very serious, right? Because marriage is not most difficult thing reserved for only a few select people.
It's a natural right.
It's a natural, fundamental right. So who are you to deny this person the right to marry? Right? And there are, canonical form is the best example of that, right? So why not allow people to marry in secret, right? I mean, you can only marry, if you're a Catholic, in this setting of 5 people. Now, the impediments are 12 laws that make a consent that would be naturally sufficient to create a marriage juridically inefficacious, right? Naturaliter sufficiens, juridice inefficax. That's there is one exception that is doesn't apply to but historically the impediments were more important than now, but I'll tell you about it immediately. Okay.
You're really testing my 2 years of Latin in high school.
Come on. Yeah, I know. I love these Latin little buzzwords. Yeah, we say Latinajos, right? Yeah, I think when we lost the Latin in the church, we lost the ability to communicate with everyone in the church, right?
I experienced that in Spain, trying to go to mass with 2 different languages.
Yes,
and then they don't speak Spanish
in Spain. In Spain,
it's either Castilian or
in Spain, there are places where you cannot even send your children to study in Spanish, which I think is pretty crazy. Anyways, okay. So these are 12 laws that make a consent that would be valid, invalid, right? And they are, as we're going to see them real quick, they are all to protect dignity of people, to protect the dignity of the marriage. You'll see that they are very selective. It's not random. I mean, it's for very, very particular cases. The first one is the impediment of age, right? So this is like a legal presumption, right? That is established by law. If you are a male under 16 or a female under 14, doesn't matter that in your culture this is common, that you are extremely mature, whatever, doesn't matter. That marriage is invalid, right? This is an impediment that discriminates a little bit. But the truth is, women tend to mature earlier than men, right? I was a teacher years ago for young kids, right? And that's when I first noticed, right? Like you saw, I don't remember the ages. I think it was 12 or 14. I don't remember. But I could notice like how the girls were all mature and outspoken, and the boys were soccer, right? And they were and that's when I thought probably, schools with both sexes together are good, but for these years, the teenage years, probably in class it would be best, especially for the boys, right, to be separate from the girls, so that they don't, because the only thing they are better at is being brutes. I don't know. I don't know.
Age, we're talking age here.
Yes. Thank you for bringing me back.
And that's an automatic pass. I mean, that's an absolute.
That's absolute. So if, I don't think our diocesan priests.
So you just prove that with a birth certificate.
And by the way, needless to say, but maybe it's worth saying it because this is recorded. This is by no means an invitation by the church to marry immediately after 14 or 16. That's not the case. So not only that, there is a law that binds our fellow priests by which if someone wants to marry, comes to you to ask for a wedding, and they are significantly below the age of marriage that is common where you live, your duty by law is to try to dissuade them. Right? Of course, it's the right, so you gotta be very careful with limiting other people's rights. But the law mandates you to are you sure, guys? Because, I mean, this is very serious. You're sure not making a mistake. Why don't you think about it a little bit? Okay. That's important. This
Send
is
them
not...
to a 2-year pre-Canon class.
There you go. There you go. Right? I mean, it's not wise to make such a relevant decision so early in life, right? This age doesn't reflect the age at which you are optimally prepared for marriage. This age tries to see what is the bare minimum at which your psyche has developed to understand what marriage is and what it entails, right? The minimum,
This
not
is minimal.
not
This
the
is minimal,
optimal, right?
Yeah.
This doesn't mean certainly that people about these ages are capable of marriage. We are seeing, I mean, we're becoming more and more immature. Childhood now goes up to 30 or 40 years old. Right? I'm still a young man at 43, which is ridiculous, right? When they call me a youth, un chico, un joven, no? In Spanish, I say, I wish, I wish. I'm not. I'm 43, right? Okay. The second one is the one that does not apply to the general description, as I was saying before, which is impotence, right? So the impotent, not those who cannot conceive, right? Those who cannot have intercourse, right, are unable of marriage. And you say, oh my God, this is so unfair. Well, I get it. I get the point that it seems unfair, but marriage is an agreement to have intercourse. So if you cannot fulfill the essential object of the contract, you're incapable of that contract. Right. It's like, I cannot sell you my Ferrari.
If I don't have one.
I don't have a Ferrari. Right? So I don't know. I cannot sell you my skyscraper because I have a humble house here in Marietta. Right? So, okay. There are two types of impotence, right? There is or incapacity, right? The impotence is the physical incapacity, and the psychological incapacity that we will see is on the psychological side, right? We will see it later in the next lesson. Okay. Then we have the impediment of prior bond, which is the most common here in the States, right? Which is basically because marriage is exclusive. If you are already married, you cannot marry again. And this applies to people who got married and then got a divorce, because the Catholic Church does not recognize the authority of any secular or other religious authorities to dissolve a bond. So if anyone was married validly, either they obtain a declaration of nullity of that marriage, or they cannot validly celebrate a new wedding. And it's important to keep in mind that this impediment does not operate on the basis of what is apparent. It operates on the basis of true marriage. So if you've been married 5 times, you've celebrated 5 weddings, and all 5 weddings were invalid, the impediment of bond doesn't apply to this new wedding you're celebrating. Okay, this is your first valid wedding. Okay, but on the other hand, if you were married, you got a civil divorce, and you attempt a new marriage, you are not getting married because the impediment of prior bond applies, right? That's why
it is not even prior civil marriages or prior bond.
So if you are not bound by canonical form, a civil marriage is a true marriage. So I don't know, Buddhists go to the city hall, they get married. Okay, we Catholic believe that they are married. Okay. And by the way, dear fathers, if those people convert, you don't need to marry them again. They are already married, right? You don't need to do a wedding. Right. They are married. The wedding becomes sacramental with the baptism of both spouses. That's the moment when it becomes a sacrament, right? There is no need to make a new wedding. Right. So the prior bond is probably the one that we the impediment that we deal with the most, right? Usually through the documentary process, which is it's just proven with documents that these marriages took place, and this was so because you had a prior marriage. This is, by the way, because of this, people need to get annulments, the declarations of nullity or dissolutions. That is why here we avoid calling your ex-husband or your ex-wife to the respondent or to the petitioner when we're talking to the respondent. And I think priests, as ministers of the Catholic Church, should avoid that too, right? I know sometimes it's difficult because they wouldn't understand you. So, I mean, be normal about it. But don't contribute to the divorce mentality by calling people your ex-spouse. I mean, they are not your ex-spouse, they are your spouse. Right. Okay, that promise stays until declared invalid or until dissolved by the authority of the church or by death. They are not your ex, right? That's a secular, postmodern conception of marriage, right? And then we have disparity of cults, right? Which is the wedding of a Catholic with a non-baptized person. That wedding is invalid unless they have a dispensation, as opposed to the wedding of a Catholic with a baptized non-Catholic. If you don't get the dispensation, that wedding is valid. Okay, it's forbidden to do that. But it's orders. Okay, so those who are clerics like yourself, deacons, priests, and presbyters and bishops cannot marry validly. And it doesn't matter that they make a huge wedding, even if they hire actors to pretend to be witnesses and they forge documents. It doesn't matter. The impediment operates regardless of what external things take place, right? You are not getting married because of this impediment. Similar to that is the impediment of vow, which is for those who have professed a public and perpetual vow of chastity in a religious congregation, right? Public and perpetual. So those who have temporary vows and then they marry, even if it's within the time of the temporary vow, it is valid. The impediment does not apply. Okay? And it's not the same. So I don't know if you have someone that you lead in a spiritual direction and they feel a calling and they make a private vow of chastity. The impediment does not apply either. Okay. Abduction. It's a very interesting, which discriminates us guys, you know? Yeah, so if a woman steals you, Deacon, and because of the Stockholm syndrome, you fall in love with her, which is, I mean, this is to prevent that, right? I mean, not only that, but also that, right? It doesn't matter that you really want to get married. You're not getting married. I mean, but only for women. So it's only for the women that is abducted. Not for the man that is hypothetically abducted, right? It doesn't protect us. And sadly, I have to say, I thought I would never see this around. I am seeing more and more. There is, I say sadly because I feel outraged by that. I mean, I was born in the 80s. So I went to school, it was boys and girls. I am used to treat women with respect, right? When these new feminists in Spain say that there is a lot of chauvinism in Spain, you should come see what I get from Mexico, right? I guess it's different in parts of Mexico, but these deep parts of Mexico, we see things that are frightening. I mean, like the first time I heard here someone saying, "No, I stole her." I wanted to call the police. What are you saying? You abducted a woman, and then it's like, well, it's more or less. And then you start asking, and I mean, I've seen cases, and with sadness in my heart, with a heavy heart, I think is the expression in English, that the father of the bride is okay with her daughter being stolen by a man, and made and forced to marry. She's like, wow, right? I one particular case feels so horrible, right? And it was a case of abduction, where she was going to the well to fetch water, and he grabbed her, and she fought, and he kept, no, you're coming, and as she got bruises on her legs, and crying and screaming, and at some point she said, I understood there was nothing I could do, so I just walked there. Poor girl. What a horrible thing. I wrote the sentence for that, and I got all preachy, right? I am always extremely respectful in my sentences. I'm always, well, it seems, and if I say something bad about someone, I will say, well, I'm not judging the moral character of people. You are only exclusively speaking about, but with this one, I was like, this is intolerable. I cannot accept this violation of human dignity. Because it is a horrible violation of human dignity. Crime, causes the nullity of consent of those who kill their own spouse, or the spouse of the other party with the intention of marrying him or her. It also causes the nullity of the marriage of those who conspire to kill a spouse with the purpose of obtaining the freedom to marry of the other spouse. So don't kill spouses, right? I mean, I know these laws may seem a little far-fetched or outrageous, but if they are here,
there's a reason, right? Yeah.
there is a reason.
There's
This
some
all
history
comes
behind
from
it.
history
Yeah,
and
okay.
experience.
Yeah.
Yes. I love this same of Chesterton. Tradition is the democracy of the dead. Beautiful sentence, and that's so true for us lawyers, right? The laws, good laws like canon laws, are here for a reason, right? We stumbled before and we learned. So be very careful with this. You know, the modern state, the Leviathan is churning laws, constantly. The codes keep growing. That's so wrong. That defeats the purpose of the law, right? The law must be known to the people and must be stable because it grants that stability that we need for progress and healthy development. Consanguinity used to be more common. It still happens every now and then. I think there are like a couple of dispensations in the diocese
I've
a
seen
year.
a couple.
You've seen?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you deal. Yeah, it's true. You are the official that deals with dispensations with Father Burke, right? So you know a lot about this. So consanguinity used to be more common because people traveled less, families were bigger, so marrying a cousin was pretty frequent. Today is less common, but you've seen. How many do we have a year?
I've personally handled 3
How about that?
in the last 2 years. So
How about that?
and that's just me.
How about
so.
that? And consanguinity affects cousins and aunts and uncles with nieces and nephews. That's well, of course, father, daughter, mother, son, grandfather, grandchildren,
Brother, sister,
all those, of course, and those are natural law and cannot be dispensed.
Right.
By the way, I have an interesting story about that. My mentor's mentor, Cardinal Urbano Navarrete, was the one who wrote the report asked by Pope Paul VI in a case in which 2 half siblings had separated during the war and then were reunited, but not knowing that we were related. They fell in love, got married, and had children. And after that, they learned that they had the impediment of consanguinity because they were half siblings. So they presented their case as good Catholics to the Pope, and the Pope was. And Cardinal Navarrete issued, he was not a cardinal, he was made a cardinal at the end of his life, issued a favorable report. And this is the time, as far as I know, that the Church has gone the furthest in granting a dispensation of the impediment of consanguinity, right?
And it was after the fact.
Yeah, probably it wouldn't have been granted if it was beforehand,
Right.
but since it was already done, the deal, right? So I repeat, for cousins and then for aunts, uncles, and nieces, that can be and is frequently dispensed, right? Affinity is like the impediment of consanguinity, but based on marriage. So the relatives the relatives of one's spouse are affine, I'm not sure, sorry, forgive me for the English, in the same degree and line as they are consanguine to oneself, right? So you cannot marry your
My wife's sister.
your wife's sister without a dispensation, right? Propriety is the same, but instead of marriage, by cohabitation. So 2 that live together, that impediment appears as well. And by the way, I think we should be looking into that probably more carefully, because nowadays cohabitation is rampant. I mean, so many people are living together more uxorio, as husband and wife. So, yeah. Adoption produces the nullity of marriages between parents and their adopted children, and between those who became siblings through adoption. And those are the 12 impediments. Okay. So we've touched so far all the dissolutions, right? And 2 of the 3 sources of matrimonial nullity. Now, the third source is not so small as this one. So the third source is huge, as you know, as an advocate, right? The incapacities, the exclusions, and the errors that we will deal with in the next lesson. Any questions remaining?
Okay.
Have I bored you enough?
Well, it's every encounter is always a learning experience, and always, pick up some jewels that I didn't have before. So, time well spent, and appreciate the opportunity to share in this with you, this
Thank
venture.
you, brother.
And
Thank you.
hopefully, again, I would say that like all courses or classes like this, it's impossible to cover every possibility. So if there is a question, pick up the phone.
Yes.
That's the best advice.
Yes. Good advice. Thank you. And for you, the priests of the diocese, courage. You are heroes. Thank you guys for what you do. And we hope that this is useful for you in your daily ministry. And also, you're always welcome to the Metropolitan Tribunal. This is a court of law. It is a court of law, but it's also a ministry of the church. So we are here to serve and to help. If there is something we can do, you can count on us. Thank you, and see you guys in the next lesson. Bye-bye.
So long.